Have you ever wondered why a friend's tears can just completely break your heart while someone else can walk right past that exact same person totally unfazed? It's wild, right? We kind of treat empathy like this universal human constant, like it's a basic feature installed in every single one of us. But the truth is, the emotional divide between people is actually a massive biological chasm. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving deep into the fascinating neuroscience and psychology behind human emotion, figuring out exactly why some of us absorb the whole world's pain, while others, well, they feel literally nothing at all.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the empathy spectrum, then move on to the broken mirror, the burden of feeling, the tribal empathy trap, and finally, we'll wrap up with the compassion shift.
So, Section 1, the empathy spectrum, mapping the emotional divide.
The very first thing we've got to get straight is that empathy, it is absolutely not an on-off switch in our brains. Enter something called the empathy quotient. This is a psychological metric developed by researchers Simon Baron-Cohen, and it perfectly illustrates how human empathy actually works in the real world. Think of it as a giant bell curve. We're definitely not all born equal here, and we aren't shaped equally by our environments either. Most people naturally sit right in the bulky center of that curve, but others are born or forced to exist near absolute zero, while some completely max out the scale entirely.
Science actually breaks this down into two very distinct types. First, you have cognitive empathy. This is strictly your intellectual ability to understand someone's perspective. It's basically just reading the room. But emotional empathy, that's entirely different. That is the physical, biological capacity to actually feel another person's pain in your own body. So it's the absolutely crucial scientific difference between simply knowing what someone feels and physically suffering right alongside them.
Which brings us to Section 2, the broken mirror, when the mind shuts down.
When we swing over to the extreme low end and map out the psychopathy spectrum, we find this massive, stark imbalance. And honestly, it reveals Baron-Cohen's terrifying paradox. Individuals with psychopathic traits often have incredibly high cognitive empathy. I mean, they can read you perfectly, they understand your triggers, and that makes them uniquely equipped to manipulate you. But they possess absolutely zero emotional empathy, meaning there's no biological drive, no internal alarm bell going off to stop them from causing harm, because they literally do not physically feel the pain they're inflicting.
But it's super important to note here that a lack of emotional empathy isn't always malicious, and it's not always hardwired at birth. Neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky's research shows us that early childhood environments play a huge, massive role in this. If a child is raised in an environment that is utterly devoid of safety, the mind can adapt by permanently compartmentalizing those feelings. It acts as a really profound survival mechanism. The brain just physically blocks emotional data from ever reaching conscious awareness, simply so the child can survive a brutal reality.
Author and researcher Brené Brown sums up why this is so insanely difficult with this incredible quote: "Empathy requires connecting to something in myself." I want you to really think about what that means. Empathy is profoundly vulnerable. To connect with your pain, I have to reach into my own mental archives and dig up a part of myself that knows that exact same agony. And for a highly traumatized, strictly compartmentalized mind, dropping those defenses to connect is a completely terrifying prospect.
All right, let's swing to the complete opposite extreme. Section 3, the burden of feeling, the hypersensitive instrument.
So, let me ask you this directly. Why do you cry when other people cry? Seriously, think about it. When you see a total stranger weeping on a screen, why do your own eyes well up? What is the actual biological mechanic happening right behind your eyes that makes their pain your pain?
The answer is something called the mirror neuron system. Neuroscientists discovered these specialized brain cells that essentially act as a biological bridge linking our minds. These neurons fire in the exact same neural pattern whether you are performing an action or if you're simply witnessing someone else doing it. It's wild. And for highly empathetic people, this system is dialed all the way up to a dangerous maximum. Their minds act like a hyper-taut violin string, vibrating and rippling intensely at just the slightest emotional breeze in the room.
What's really amazing about this is that centuries before we had fMRI machines to actually map these neural pathways, philosophers intuitively understood it. Way back in 1739, David Hume wrote, "The minds of all men are mirrors to one another." It's kind of a wonderful philosophical breather, right? To realize Hume predicted this exact neuroscientific discovery hundreds of years ago. He just knew our feelings were inherently contagious. But here's the catch. This biological mirroring comes with a really severe cost. Psychologist Paul Bloom warns us about a phenomenon called empathic distress. See, when you feel another person's pain too deeply, it doesn't actually make you a hero. Often, it turns your focus entirely inward because suddenly you are in agony too. It brings on massive psychological burnout and literally paralyzes our ability to step in and help. We end up too overwhelmed by the ambient trauma to be of any practical use whatsoever.
Moving on to Section 4, the tribal empathy trap, biology's curveball.
Consider the fascinating duality of oxytocin. We casually call it the love hormone, but Robert Sapolsky's findings reveal a much darker side to it. Yes, oxytocin floods our system and heightens empathy, giving us this intense bonding with our in-group, our family, our friends, our tribe. But ironically, that exact same hormone biologically decreases empathy and actively fuels hostility for anyone in the out-group. Our biology just effortlessly extends grace to those who look and act like us while totally shutting down the emotional mirror for outsiders.
So the big question is, how do we beat our own biology? Well, philosophers like Peter Singer argue for a concept called the expanding circle. We all start centered on the self and family, which requires zero effort. That's just baseline biology. But then we have to use our conscious reason to purposefully push past that biological tribalism. We have to actively force that circle outwards, step by step. First to our community, then our nation, and eventually to all sentient beings. It literally requires intent to override our localized biological defaults.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the compassion shift, finding the Aristotelian balance.
Psychologist Paul Bloom offers us what might be the ultimate solution. He says we need to move away from raw empathy, which is that forced biological suffering where you're essentially drowning in someone else's pain, and instead we need to practice compassion. And get this, compassion actually utilizes entirely different neural pathways in the brain. It's a more detached, warm desire to help. Think of it like this. It allows you to throw a life preserver to someone who is drowning without jumping into the freezing water to drown right alongside them.
And here is the exceptionally good news from Robert Sapolsky, neuroplasticity. Our place on the empathy spectrum isn't set in stone. We can deliberately train our brains. If you lack empathy, you can build it up like a muscle through conscious perspective taking and compassion-focused meditation. And if you're a hyperempath, you can employ cognitive grounding techniques to build bounded empathy. You're basically erecting a mental shield that keeps those highly strung mirror neurons in check.
The clinical data backs this up beautifully too. Studies show that compassion meditation literally reshapes the brain, resulting in increased gray matter density in regions associated with social connection. On the flip side, when highly sensitive people practice grounding exercises while viewing tragic imagery, they measurably lower their cortisol and skin conductance. So these mental techniques aren't just neat psychological concepts, they literally alter your physical biology and lower your stress hormones. It's amazing how this modern data perfectly validates ancient wisdom. Aristotle actually wrote that, "To feel them at the right time is virtue." He argued that virtue wasn't about simply feeling as much as possible all the time, but rather mastering the timing, the amount, and the boundaries of our emotions. True virtue is balance.
So why does all this matter? Why even go through the effort of balancing this spectrum? Because empathy acts as our fundamental moral compass. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied patients with brain damage specifically in their emotional processing centers, and what he found was absolutely astonishing. Without emotional input to assign value to different choices, these individuals became physically incapable of making even simple logical decisions. A society completely devoid of empathy wouldn't be cold and hyperlogical, it would instantly dissolve into chaos, because logic actually requires emotional value to function.
Damasio delivers this powerful summary to really drive the point home. He says, "We are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think." Let that sink in. Our entire sense of reason, every single rational choice we believe we are making, is built firmly and inescapably on top of our emotional foundations.
We are navigating this deeply complex biological spectrum every single day. Some of us need to build stronger emotional muscles, while others desperately need to construct protective boundaries. Knowing exactly how your unique biological mirror works is the very first step toward truly mastering your social world. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to consider today. Look at your own life, your own reactions, and your own boundaries. Where is your mirror aimed right now?